How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind, who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. Hello, sweet folks. Happy, warm, and sunny springtime to you all. A quick little note to say that if you are a lover of all things Instagram, come on over and say hey. You can find me and my artwork at Fain House, and you can find this podcast at Fain House Radio, a great place to see the faces behind the voices of the people in these interviews. Also, if you know anyone at all who might find support and inspiration from these conversations, please do tell them all about it. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
My name is Daniel Nevins. The main creative endeavors of my life. I have been a graphic designer. I have been an art director. I have been an illustrator. I have been a fine artist. I am now a psychotherapist. I play music, but that would be the one that because I have such great respect for musicians, I would hesitate calling myself one of those. But it's a great resource in my life to know how to play the guitar, to know how to play the mandolin. I guess what I would be known for is as being a painter in terms of what socially is considered a creative endeavor.
Well, I like what you're saying because it's like some creative endeavors were for the outside world. Some creative endeavors were more just for you, maybe.
Absolutely. And the older I get, the more those lines, not those lines blur, but where my focus is in those things has changed over time. I've become a full-time psychotherapist. So now I get to paint for the sheer joy of painting. And it's a wonderful place to be painting from. When I decided to go get my master's in clinical mental health counseling, they ask you to write an essay about why you want to do this. I guess maybe to kind of weed out the psychos, you know? And that's a technical term, psychos. We use that. You know? And I started with a quote from Leonard Cohen. I think it was Leonard's response to someone asking him why he spent 5 years in a Zen monastery. He said, "Abandon your masterpiece and sink into the real masterpiece." And that's exactly what it felt like I was doing when I was moving from being a painter to a psychotherapist. Because it felt like being a painter, here was my masterpiece. And eventually someone put a frame around it, and the things outside that frame weren't my masterpiece. And it felt like moving towards psychotherapy meant that I was living a masterpiece without a frame, without a context, or the context was everything. So now my masterpiece was how I have my tea and how I speak to friends and how I move through the world. So maybe it's a change from being the painter to being the painting. So that's how it feels to me now.
The reason I reacted when you said that about maybe, the painting versus the painter or, that kind of thing, I can't remember who said it, but it's my favorite quote. I thought I wanted to be a poet, but I wanted to be the poem.
Nice, exactly. It's early in the conversation for me to quote Leonard Cohen twice, but I love me some Leonard Cohen. He has this very short poem where he says, "There was only one thing that made him happy. And when it was gone, everything made him happy." And that's how I feel too. I think maybe for a while, painting was the only thing that made me happy. And maybe for a while, it stopped making me happy. not because I didn't like painting, but I was certainly disenchanted with the art world. And I still have people ask me, how's the art world? And I always have to say, which one? Because there isn't one art world. There are many, many, many art worlds. They're all equally valid and equally invalid, I think. The mistake, I think I'll just stick with painters. The mistake a lot of painters make is they think they're in one art world, but they're actually making work that belongs in another art world. If you can get that right, at least you can make work that's appropriate for that art world and not be wondering, why am I not accepted here? I don't know. The art world is very uninteresting to me. I think that if you talk to an indigenous culture and you explained the role art plays in our culture, they would say, you guys don't know what art is for, do you? The fact that we exchange it for money and that people become famous for it, or people are destroyed by it because they invest so much of their identity in it. And when that investment isn't returned, they feel crushed. It's all very problematic, I think. And I think it's fairly new that we have that relationship with art. Certainly hundreds, not even maybe thousands of years old. It wasn't that long ago, people didn't sign their work. That wasn't the point of it. All those great Gregorian chants, we don't know who wrote them. That wasn't the point of it. I always sign my paintings on the back. I don't think I've ever signed a painting on the front. I couldn't imagine signing small enough that it wouldn't be intrusive to what the image looks like to me. Big difference between making art and being in the art world.
You've clearly had all these like steps and stages on your creative path that now brought you here. Was there a point in your youth or even when you were a child where you knew that creativity in whatever form had to be in your life? Did you have a turning point or a mentor, separate from any of the money stuff, just where you knew that was a part of you?
Yeah, I definitely knew it when I was very young. I mean, my earliest memories of being deeply involved in it. It always had a mystical quality to me. Like, this is between me and whatever, God or whatever. But it was built in and had to do with everything and felt very special and felt very powerful, maybe even delusional, to the point where I thought, if I get this right, it'll change the world. And I mean at 5, 6, 8. And then somewhere, I guess where most people often go astray, somewhere around junior high, I'm like, okay, being the weirdo isn't helping. I probably adopted the ways of the monkeys around me and said, okay, I guess this is what you're supposed to do. And even when I went to college, my degree was in graphic design. It wasn't fine art. I've never taken a painting class. I know nothing about painting, even though I made a living at it for 30 years. Nobody ever showed me how to paint. I took a lot of drawing classes, but graphic design seemed like, well, that's, in the realm of creativity, but it's responsible, that's a real job, you show up in an office. And I did that through my 20s, but then right when I turned 30, and it was funny because that was the time graphic design was turning into computers. Everything was going to be on the computer. And I didn't like that, because before that, graphic design was very almost craft-like. It was what we call paste up, where you had to wax the back of the typesetting, and you were actually building a mechanical. That's what it was called. You made a mechanical. And then when it just became pixels, I kind of just said, I don't like this. I mean, this doesn't feel very tactile to me. So at 29, 30, I said, I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to give it a shot. And I did that for over 20 years. I think your question was about mentors or turning points. I had a bunch of them. I mean, I don't even know where to start. So many. Some I met and knew, and some I was just aware of their work and read a book or, and many that weren't visual artists. I've already mentioned Leonard Cohen twice. So all of that stuff kind of feeds in. The people I remember the most are not the people who encouraged me, but the ones who told me, you're not as good as you think you are. If you really want to be good at this, it's going to take a lot more than what you're giving it. That's valuable. When someone doesn't want to be your friend and risks losing your friendship to tell you something really important. I'm trying to think of who might have really influenced me as a painter. I knew a bunch of them. There was this old guy down in Florida named Lenny Kessel. And anybody who's listening to this who knows Lenny Kessel just got a big smile on their face because he was an amazing guy. He was a true eccentric. He was a painter, a sculptor, a ceramicist, a jazz musician, a drummer, a singer, and just one of those people that you'll never forget in your life. And meant a lot to me that he took a shine to me. When I was in college, I worked at a place called the Original Pizza Palace in Gainesville, Florida, and I was a dishwasher. I loved being a dishwasher. And this was kind of a very bohemian type of place. And Lenny had a special arrangement with the Pizza Palace that if he drew a picture on his check, then he could eat for free. And he didn't like drawing in front of people. So he would come back to the wine racks, which were right behind where the dishwasher was. And he would talk to me as he was drawing his thing, and I was washing the dishes. And he had this gruff voice. He knew I was an artist, and, he would just coach me as this disembodied voice behind me. And I'd say, Lenny, I'm really interested in woodcuts right now. And he would say, oh, well, now you need to look at Schmidt-Rutloff. And the German expressionists were really great at the woodcuts and all of this stuff. And I would just be soaking up all this. But what he really taught me is be yourself. Just let your life flow. Don't worry about what people think. And he certainly didn't. I was thinking about him recently when people have kind of pointed out that I've gone from being a painter to being a psychotherapist, and that some people say that seems like a big leap. And then some people who really know me go, no, that seems about right. And I do think that I was, even as a painter, trying to do some form of therapy. I think I was trying to do therapy with shapes and colors. And I remember once a conversation with Lenny, and we were talking about a painter that we both liked, but there was something about, or we both appreciated the quality of the work. And Lenny said, yeah, he's a good painter. I'm just not sure he has my best interests at heart. And that really landed for me. I thought, wow, is that part of our job? To have the viewer's best interests at heart? And I think I've always operated under that. I think it's probably an easy thing to shock people. I can think of a million things I could paint that would shock somebody, but that doesn't feel like something I want to be known for or to have put into the world. Not that I always paint happy things. I paint some pretty introspective, at least, if not sad things. Yeah, the idea that part of our criteria is it good for people? I don't think they teach that in school.
No. And I mean, what an interesting debate. Art for the sake of art, or everything being art, or do you need to know what the artist meant when they created the art or know the artist at all? Should the art speak for itself? Like you're saying, is it a service or a disservice for the medium and subject matter to make people feel good when they look at it? And many say no. I know that for me, I feel kind of more like you, like I want to share this like really sweet, yellowy, lovely kind of little heart feeling out to whoever's looking.
Yeah. I don't think my muse works that way. Maybe some people's muse does. And, when I look at, I never really felt like I landed in any art world. You asked me about when I changed styles from a kind of narrative style to a more abstract style. I remember when that happened, and I absolutely changed worlds. Sales went way down. But all of a sudden I was being included in museum shows. And I got a North Carolina Arts Council fellowship grant. So I was like, okay, here it is. They both kind of felt valid to me, but there weren't many people who appreciated both. And I still don't think there are. You know, there are people who only want my abstract work, and there are people who only want my narrative work. And I almost get the feeling with each camp, they wish the other camp didn't exist.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about this, because for years before we ever met, I mean, I went and looked at your paintings so much in the Blue Spiral. I have another friend also did the same. We met years later and we talked about your art, and all we just would go and look and go and look and look and look and look and look and just super moved. It's like this poetry feeling for sure. Almost like there's a voice you're sharing that's speaking to me. And that felt so good. You had so many different, like you're saying, narratives, so many stories and paintings and paintings and paintings, and just the feeling of what you're saying, those were so sellable. You know, they just were like, people could understand. Here's a picture. Here's the horse. Here's the boy. I understand. He's asleep in the top of the tree. You know, I understand that. Right. Yeah. And then when you made that shift, and because you did have a solid following for our region, you know, and I do encourage people to go look up your work. To make that shift, I felt like you still had so much story in there and a softness still in there. I remember thinking, I bet he's feeling like happier now or something.
Well, yeah, I had a great sense of gratitude that people liked the work. I mean, I went years and years where I sold everything I made, and it felt great. And maybe it had something to do with also coming from illustration, you know, because I'd done a lot of illustration, and it was like, well, gosh, as long as I get to paint, it's all gravy. I don't know. It's hard for me to go back into that head. I do know it changed April 6th, 2008. That's when it absolutely switched. I guess there were things leading up to it. Of course there were, but I knew it was a risk, but I also knew being an artist is a risk. You know, I think of my late great friend, Robert Johnson, the great Robert Johnson. Oh, I miss him. What a wonderful man. He took me under his wing and was just a great, wonderful fellow. When I started doing the abstract work, and, you know, some of them were 8 feet wide, 10 feet wide, 6 feet tall. So again, kind of restricting who can purchase it and where they would put it. And so, you know, I wasn't making it easy to be collectible at that point. Robert visited me and he looked at it and he goes, "These are really good. You know, no one's going to buy them, right?" And I said, "Thanks, Robert. Thanks for that." You know, he wasn't entirely right, but he was more right than not. But it kind of didn't matter. What's the point of being an artist if you don't push your boundaries? And maybe just I got tired of telling stories. Wow, you're reminding me. I think I was asked about this way back then in, I don't know, Mountain Express or something like that. And I think this is true. I mean, this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but I think it's true. That I think with the narrative work, if we're all in some sort of field of energy, right? I mean, something is happening here, right? You know, my senses tell me that things tend to happen. Plants grow, people talk on podcasts. Well, what is this energy that's moving us around? Because I think we're more verbs than nouns. I think of a person as more of a process than a thing. So what is this energy that's moving things around that just tends to be? And I think my narrative paintings were painting the effects of that energy, the visual manifestations of the energy. So I said, what if I paint the energy itself? What would that look like? Almost like, what would you paint to describe the taste of a strawberry if you didn't paint a strawberry? What would that look like? And that became interesting to me and very freeing, very, very open. I know you're a musician and I dabble. So it's almost like the narrative work were like folk songs and the abstract work were more like symphonies that woo. And even like with the narrative work, I would think a lot about titles. I would try and choose a title that deepened the mystery. It should add something to it. But once I started doing the abstract work, I just numbered them as I did them. Because I said, if I say anything, people will see it as that.
With the abstract ones not having the title, it's really truly giving the viewer permission to see what they see and feel how they feel and not be guided. It's not like a leading question, you know?
There's something about the large scale was important too. And I had a friend come to the studio once, Dana, and Dana sat in front of this painting for a long time. She's one of the few people I could paint in front of. I didn't paint in front of people. In fact, when, like somebody was coming to do a story, they would always say, paint and we'll take a picture of that. And I said, no, I can't do that, because it won't be a picture of me painting. It'll be a picture of me pretending to paint. But anyway, I was very relaxed with Dana in the studio, and I noticed she'd been sitting there for like a half an hour. And it was like an 8-foot by 8-foot painting or something. She was real quiet, and I went over and sat by her, and I asked her, I said, so what do you think? And she said, it's telling me to face my truth. Great. But I guarantee if you put 100 people down, they would say 100 different things, right? But what I was going to say about scale is, when I was doing the narrative work, there was always, maybe there were some just animals, but it was almost very people-centric, human-centric. There was the sense that it was a representation of a person, almost like this is a picture of a scene you might encounter. There wasn't that sense with a big abstract painting. It was it. It didn't represent something else. It's not something you were going to see as you moved about your life. It's not something you would have taken a picture of. This was it. I was in a one-to-one relationship with this thing. And that felt very different. I wasn't building a scale model of something that I knew in the world. I was wrestling with something as an entity. The very famous painter Bryce Marden, he has a show right now in New York, and I love the title of it. The title of the show is These Paintings Are of Themselves.
That's like a whole new level of a moment in time. It makes me think a little bit of one of a kind. This is a whole different level.
Yeah. It's like when you walk into a room with something like this, you're not walking into something that's giving you an idea or a metaphor. It's like walking into a room where a wild animal is. It has that kind of presence. More like a sculpture is. Like a sculpture is the thing. It doesn't represent something else. It is the thing. When you stand in front of a Rothko, you don't say, what's it a painting of? It's a painting of it. Forget that it's even a painting. It is itself. Yeah. So that, and that was very different and very freeing and very, very wonderful. Now I'm at a place where I just go back and forth. I'm working on a painting right now. And it's the kind of painting I could have done 15 years ago. And it just feels lovely, feels wonderful. I don't have to justify it in one way or another. So, the muse just reaches into that black bag and pulls out something and says, you want to do this? And I say, sure, let's do that.
Yeah, you're following the good feeling.
Yeah, now it feels so luxurious to paint. To spend a day painting is like going to the spa for me now. And I think as a psychotherapist, I live in language and concepts. So to stop talking, just the sensual pleasure of moving paint across a surface. Mission accomplished, in terms of sinking into the real masterpiece.
What are your thoughts about creativity in all its forms and mental health?
Ooh, that's a big one. I think we might have to bring that down into little smaller bites. I mean, there are those people who just believe that, and I don't disagree with this, that we're all creating all the time. There's no such thing as not creating. I guess the thing that comes to my mind when you ask that is attention. Where do we put our attention? It seems like creativity is a kind of concentrated attention. I think we're getting really close to mindfulness when we talk about this. Am I really present for this? Or am I future tripping or ruminating about the past? And am I in my body? Am I here now? And am I in my body? Because I don't know if you can be creative without those things. And some of that means paying attention to what this brain is doing and realizing we're not our thoughts. We are the place where thoughts arise spontaneously, which is different than thinking, right? We choose to think, but thoughts think themselves. But if you can become aware of that, you can notice that there's a noticer of those thoughts. That's the place I create from now. I don't really know what to say to others about it or have advice. It was drilled into my head in grad school, these two words: it depends. If somebody comes into my therapeutic setting and, well, they're presenting with these symptoms, what should you do? It depends. It always depends. And maybe that's what I love about psychotherapy. It's as much of an art as it is a science. Though I am very evidence-based, I know I have to throw that out. Everything I know I have to throw out when I'm with an individual. And everything I do with them has to be tailored to who I'm talking to. So what a wonderful way to be present and creative and mindful is to slow down and notice. I think that's one of the best advices I've ever heard. Notice what you notice. And maybe I would say also, be careful what you let in. It matters what you pay attention to. It's not neutral what you let into your life, visually, audio-wise. I don't want to sound like an old man, but I am an old man. And I'm glad I grew up at a time when I could spend hours as a kid lying on a hillside looking at clouds. And that was entertainment. I had the luxury of being bored a lot because I think that's where creativity comes from, especially when you're a kid. I lament that these kids don't have enough time being bored. It hurts my heart.
And then they think that if they're bored, there's something wrong. And that's not true.
No. Same thing with anxiety. They show up and they say, I have anxiety. I'm like, welcome to the human race. Great. It's adaptive. Sometimes you need to be anxious. If you're never anxious, you're probably not pushing against your growth edge. Something should make you anxious. Realize you have this opportunity to shape your world and your life any way you want it. If that means creating things, great. If that means cooking a good meal, great. I'm getting to the point where I separate art and life very reluctantly.
I mean, I feel also there's not necessarily a line, there's not like a line to cross where you're in one or out of it or anything. I mean, some of what you're saying, I love how you're saying it's tailored and it gives everyone permission to do it differently and be different. And it depends on who we are. And then also some of what you're saying makes me think of creativity as a tool. So if you're feeling anxiousness or you're feeling like you're ruminating or looking forward too much or whatever, there's a million versions of what happens for all of us mentally. But if we are noticing and we know doing something creative as a tool to bring us back in, then it could be in our toolbox. Okay, I'm getting I'm getting like loopy here. I'm going to go pick a recipe. I'm going to go do a collage. and use it as a way to come back in, and that it's totally valid. It's not like you're just being selfish or whatever. It's a way to bring you in. That's like a great thing to have in our toolbox to help us deal with our mental selves.
Could not agree more. And now we have the science to back that up. This is a wonderful time, from my point of view, this is a wonderful time for the mental health profession and what we know about how to help people. It's interesting that so much of it is going back to mindfulness, stuff that's thousands of years old. When you're talking about getting up into that mindy place of being wound up, we know now that there's this area of the brain, it's actually 3 areas that connect, that's called the default mode network. And it's very much concerned about us. If the ego had an address in the brain, it would be the default mode network. What is everyone thinking about me? What should I be doing? Am I failing in my career? Am I failing in my marriage? Whatever it is, right? And we know one of the prime ways to turn down the default mode network is to be involved in a task that takes all of our concentration. So if it's cooking a meal, if it's just paying attention to your body and paying attention to your bodily sensations, but certainly painting, playing an instrument, any way that we can turn down the default mode network gives us relief. I think it was Joseph Campbell who talked about people coming to him and saying that they were concerned about the meaning of life. They didn't know the meaning of life, which of course is definitely default mode network generated, right? That there's supposed to be a meaning to this. And he would say, I think that's not even the question you want to ask. And he said, when you're truly feeling alive, the question of meaning disappears. And I think that's true. If I'm having a good day playing music with friends or painting or even a great therapy session or a conversation with you, I'm not thinking of the meaning of this. I'm just here.
Right back to mindfulness again, huh?
I don't know how you get away from it.
Well, it's so wonderful because, complicated and nuanced, but actually so simple too. There's so many things to think about, so many things to follow, so many things to try. Yeah. And I like the idea of a little bit of a mantra, like it comes back to mindfulness. It comes back to, everything can come back to that. And let's keep it a little bit simple for ourselves.
Yeah. There's a guy I like a lot. And with most people, I don't have to agree with anybody on everything. I'm just like, do they have good ideas? And there's a guy named Sam Harris. He has a very good meditation app and he has some really great ideas, I think. He's a neuroscientist. He says, at the end of our life, what we're going to regret is what we paid attention to. If you pull in the Stoics, they would always say, remember death. This doesn't go on forever, man. You're going to want to pay attention to what you pay attention to and ask yourself, is it worthy? And I think it's maybe harder now than it's ever been. You said, whether you said simple or easy with mindfulness, simple, not always easy. Because like you said, the world is always pulling us away.
Right.
And trust me, it's by design. Silicon Valley has a lot of people trying to figure out how do we pull them away. But it is a muscle. And if you do work that muscle, it does get a lot easier so that your default does become more mindful as opposed to caught up in the trivia of the world.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of hope in what you just said. There's hope in the idea that we could strengthen the muscle.
I talk to people in my practice all the time, and I think there's still kind of a cultural idea of therapy that it's about insight. I'm going to go to the therapist and they're going to give me an insight about my family or the way I move through the world. And once I have that insight, everything will change. Hasn't been my experience, and I don't think the literature supports that idea. It's much more a practice. Develop a practice of paying attention. And then the fruit of that tends to keep it there.
Right.
When you realize, I'm suffering less. I talk to people all the time, there's going to be suffering here. So we can't do anything about that. But we can do something about the illegitimate suffering that we create for ourselves. And so much suffering is unnecessary. I don't think we can do, and we wouldn't want to do anything about the necessary suffering. It's what makes us interesting and soulful. I think it was James Joyce who said loss is an acronym for love's old sweet song. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's painful. It's beautiful. It's human. It's intensely human. But we don't have to make it harder for ourselves. And we do it all the time. We all do.
What is filling up your inspiration cup these days? Do you have some books you're loving, some favorite things you're doing, or what's making you feel like excited about things?
Gosh, there's so many things every day. In the literature world and in the fiction world, I would say the best book, or the one that has really affected me the most over the past few years, is a book by Richard Powers called The Overstory. It will change how you feel about trees. It's a beautiful story. I have turned at least a dozen people onto it, and a lot of them had the same reaction. They said, at about halfway through, I started reading much more slowly because I didn't want it to end. It was just a pleasure going through each reading. I mean, just each paragraph was just, it was delicious. An amazing book, The Overstory. In sort of the psychology meets Buddhism world, there's a great book called Already Free by Bruce Tift. That's absolutely amazing. He's a psychotherapist and a Buddhist. It's one of those books I will never, ever be tired of. What else is filling me up? There's a late great Irish poet named John O'Donoghue. He has a great poem. I titled a painting after the title of this poem. It's called Fluent. Isn't that a great word? Fluent. And the whole poem is, I'd love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its unfolding. I don't know if it gets better than that. For me, it's carried by the surprise. To think that a river is surprised, that what moves it along is its surprise at its own unfolding. I don't even know what to do with it, but just like, yeah, me too. I'd like to live that way too. Can we all be carried by the surprise of our own unfolding? Yes. Yes, let's do that. And if you ever want a piece of music that's going to break your heart and mend it at the same time, Henryk Górecki, The Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, Symphony Number 3. You can't go wrong with it. That's my desert island music. Yeah.
I really, really love hearing that people answer this question. It is so fun. And then to go then and find some of what you've mentioned and then kind of think of the person who suggested it at the same time as you're reading it or listening to it. It's a very fun loop. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, well, just in the time you said that, I thought of a number of other Everyone should listen to David Foster Wallace's commencement speech called This is Water. Listen to it once a year. It'll reset you. It's on YouTube. And there's a guy who produces things called like Stories of Old is his handle. Watch his one on the movie Patterson, because he takes that David Foster Wallace speech and combines it with the movie Patterson. And it's absolutely wonderful.
And it's fun too, because to go check some of these things out, part of that whole idea is, you can see on your face how the word's not happiness. It's like a kind of feeling when we connect with a poem, we connect with music, and it's such a great feeling of like a discovery and a new, great, beautiful feeling. And it's so cool to pass that to each other.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful when someone shares something like that. And I love it when people share those things with me. I'm always looking for those ones that it's impossible to be done with them. It's not like, okay, I got what I needed, I'm moving on. It's like, wow. And isn't it marvelous and strange just to be here? Was that line from Rilke? Being here is so much.
I wonder what you would paint if somebody said, here's the title of your show, Being Here is So Much. Now go paint what that is for you.
I think in terms of paintings, I have at least 3 of them with that title. Being Here is So Much, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Yeah. The one that comes to mind is 3 women, looks like 3 sisters, and the one in the middle is holding a turtle. So that's at least one version of what being here is so much would look like to me.
In closing, do you have any last words of encouragement for anyone out there just trying hard to hold on to that balloon, of the hopefulness, creative side of themselves in the middle of the hard parts of life, and to not give up on that red balloon?
It depends on why they're having trouble hanging on to that balloon. The remedy for it would be different for different people. And I would question, if it's hard, why is it hard? This is supposed to be joyful. This is supposed to be something we do because it brings us joy. So I would wonder, why is it hard? Kind of feels like some concepts are getting in the way. Maybe some comparisons. Oh, I'm not as good as them, or I want to paint like that, but I can't. Or I'm hearing a lot of critic, and throw the critic out. I mean, there's a time for the critic to come and the editor to come and kind of clean up things. That's fine. but don't let the editor come in too early. And it depends. I mean, are you trying to make a living at it? Is it a time thing? I would say relax. That's what I would say. I don't put a lot of stock in dreams because most of my dreams are just ridiculous and not very instructive at all. But I have had a few, and I'm thinking of one I had maybe 8 years ago before I got into grad school. And I was working on a really big painting. It was 10 feet wide. It kept changing, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And I was getting really frustrated. I mean, this went on for a couple of months. I remember I was going to a concert the next day, and it was the Irish musician Glenn Hansard. But the night before the concert, Glenn Hansard came to me in a dream. And he had that beautiful Irish brogue. And I was sitting there in front of this 10-foot painting that I couldn't figure out. And I probably shouldn't do the accent, but it was something like, you're having trouble with this, are you? And I said, yeah, Glenn, I'm really having trouble with it. And he said, I have 3 things to tell you. I was like, okay, I'm listening. And he said, number 1, admit what you're trying to do is hard. That's good advice. You're not just trying to do a painting, you're trying to do a good painting, and a big painting at that. I'm hoping this works for everybody. Admit what you're trying to do is hard, You're not trying to do something, you're trying to make something good. Okay, can we admit that? And he said, number 2, he says, I see you bullying this painting. Why are you bullying it? Why don't you ask it what it wants to be? Which I was, wow, why don't I ask it what it wants to be? Take my little sticky fingers off the steering wheel. Quit yelling at the painting and maybe listen for a second and relax. It'll tell you. And he said, one more thing. If you're kinder with the painting, you'll probably be kinder with yourself. I thought, okay. And if you're kinder with yourself, then I won't have to come and visit you in your dreams and give you this advice. So anyway, I thought that was really, really good advice. And I'll stand by it.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Abandon your masterpiece and sink into the real masterpiece. Leonard Cohen.